Do you not agree that staying at our grandparents' home meant we were always well fed? Who do we have to thank for such a well-thought-out meal plan? Your grandma. Let's see how she made your week special with her culinary skills. You end an otherwise pretty good day of eating with an even better dinner. Some more protein and mushroom pot pies so you can go out with an earthy bang. A pot pie is easily one of the most recognizable dishes to come out of America, and that's been a fact since the start of the 20th century. So you can only imagine how many pot pie recipes have been passed down, perfecting a pretty specific flavor. Man, I tell you, it was a challenge finishing everything your grandma could make. They'd usually spare no corners when it came to the portions either, and a turkey and mushroom pot pie was already a pretty heavy customer to deal with. The savory filling featured a lot of turkey, roasted mushrooms, peas, carrots, and a bechamel sauce, all in a flaky but crumbly crust that made each bite delightful. This is a flavor profile that you'll find litters the Midwest. They really love their mushrooms, but you could find this basic pot pie recipe in many humble homes all across America. Remember going to sleep after one of these? You wouldn't wake up until the afternoon. Home chefs were really crafty in the 20th century. After a decade or two of living under the effects of the Depression, making the most of whatever bare minimum ingredients they could get thanks to the World Wars, and going back to exploring things besides basic diner food, they learned an all-important life skill: how to make a week-long menu that tasted good and gave you all the support your body needed to make it through the week. So Tuesday breakfast started strong with a breakfast wrap, which used a soft tortilla with stuff like scrambled eggs, bacon, sausages, ham, cheese, and a lot of greens. Grandmas thought this was a real convenient way to sneak those into the diets of their otherwise picky eaters. They'd fill it with spinach, bell peppers, tomatoes, or even roasted broccoli. They'd put in things like hash browns, salsas, avocados, hot sauces, or sour creams to mask all the flavors of those vegetables. The best thing about the wrap wasn't how it tasted, but the format of the recipe itself. A wrap itself was a lot of your fiber needs covered, and when you could make the filling as varied as that, it meant that it was the perfect breakfast option. Portable, easy to assemble, quick to prepare, and takes care of every nutrition need you could have this early in the day and week. No wonder they caught on so well for street stalls too. Tuesdays were usually really soft and easy days at Grandma's. You'd have chewy, easy-to-handle dishes like wraps, and for lunch, homemade potato gnocchi instead of super heavy lunch meals. It worked too, as Monday was a pretty savory-oriented day. These homemade potato gnocchis were soft, pillowy dumplings that used something that was probably at the height of its popularity in the 20th century, which was potatoes. During both the Depression and the rationing-focused war period, potatoes were some of the only things that carried entire families to the end of the week with a full stomach. These used mashed potatoes, sometimes eggs and flour, but it was all in the kneading of the dough and the shaping of the gnocchi. It was to be rolled into long ropes and made into small pieces, and there was a technical aspect to it that meant only grandmas could give you grade A tier gnocchis, the kind you would pay money for, you know? Also, I don't know about you, but I kind of preferred Yukon Gold potatoes over russet ones. The best part about a gnocchi was that it was really flexible, which is something you might be noticing with the trend of Tuesday's menu. You could use any kind of sauce as a part of the filling, like let's say you had grandkids that were more on the creamy sauce team. You could stick a classic Alfredo in there, or if you wanted a savory, clearer sauce, you could use a mushroom one. A lot of the dishes you'll see here can be spun 1,000 different ways, and the true potential of a dish like that comes out when a cook who can take full advantage of it is the one cooking it. Time to wrap up Tuesday, and that too on a pretty memorable dinner. A lot of fiber in your day? Knock yourself out with some protein, because beef tenderloin is a premium cut of meat, and when you pair it with a hearty mushroom sauce, you get a dish for the ages. This is one of the most tender cuts of beef you can find, and it goes perfectly with sauces like this. Grandmas always knew what kind of dishes went best with what sauces. I guess it makes sense. You don't build up an A-list team without knowing the best parts of each player after all. What really impressed me was all the different kinds of mushrooms they could make a sauce out of. Cremini, shiitake, and porcini were the most common ones, but portobello mushrooms were also really common choices in southern areas. The mushrooms would be sautéed and made using butter, shallots, and garlic, and the beef would be done pretty simple but perfectly. If there's one thing grandmas knew, it was how to make a restaurant great steak with just a pan sear. That takes some real skill to do, since a pan sear is the easiest thing to mess up if you don't know how to handle it sensitively. The seasonings for the tenderloin were pretty simple, but they didn't need to be overly fancy, since a lot of the flavor also came from the sauce. They'd also keep a tenderloin or two where they added wine and brandy to the sauce for after the kids went to sleep. It was sometimes considered a dish to celebrate special occasions, but it was simple enough to make if you ever had a craving for it too. Now, the midweek crisis hit hard, but we can always depend on our grandmothers to make Wednesday bearable. You see, cinnamon rolls are great, but they can get a bit old. Luckily, if there's anyone that knows how to innovate, it's your veteran baker grandmother, and they came up with a neat little variation that was known as caramel rolls to make your Wednesday breakfast better. These were always a more niche roll than the others you could find, and they weren't exactly a popular breakfast option except in some specific roadside diners in states like Minnesota and North Dakota, but they became a staple of breakfasts around the middle of the 1900s. That sauce had cinnamon rolls outclassed though, and it also fit the caramel obsession that general taste palates were heading for at the time. Plus, it was a great way to start your Wednesday when you're a bit low on energy from the first 2 days of the week. A sugar rush in the morning is the perfect thing to carry some momentum into your week, though it's definitely a meal more suited for kids. I don't know about you, but I can't stomach this heavy menu as an adult. It worked because this is a once-in-a-week thing, since grandmas also knew that there was no massive nutritional value here, just a lot of fun to be had while eating it. It gave you energy, but it lacked any real fiber or protein, so it wasn't a dish they regularly included. Plus, you had to save some room for other desserts, right? Breakfast was just the prelude to a day full of indulgent eating, because for lunch, pot roasts like sauerbraten are some of the best childhood memories any kid can grow up with if they live in the States. The entire process of making one from scratch, prepping it for hours and hours, watching your grandma bring that full-bodied flavor to every corner of the house, and then finally getting to eat it when it was done, is something that every kid can remember excitedly. If a pot roast was happening, you'd know that everyone was eating well. Thanks to slow cookers, pot roasts became even easier and more common. Your poor old grandmother didn't need to spend hours in the heat of the kitchen tending to one anymore. She could just rest while it tended to itself in the slow cooker. That made sauerbraten in particular pretty handy as a dish because it had everything you technically needed out of one. They'd skip the wine if they were making it for the kids, but it had raisins, lean meat, fiber, and fats, which meant that they could rest assured. Their grandkids weren't only having a meal they enjoyed, but one they really needed, especially as convenience foods and cafeteria culture meant that more and more kids just weren't getting popular nutrition in their day-to-day lives anymore. After ending Tuesday on such a heavy note, it's best to keep things light and simple on Wednesday with gnocchi chicken skillets for dinner. You're already familiar with this from Tuesday's menu anyway, but gnocchis are some of the best dumplings you can get. They became more popular during the latter half of the 20th century when Americans were importing more and more recipes from other countries and taking more notes out of immigrant communities in their own surroundings. One of the dishes that got popular even within the mainstream as a result was these potato dumplings served with a chicken skillet. You'd have chicken inside the dumplings too, but if you wanted, grandmas would often tweak the dish a little and serve a pure skillet featuring the dumplings as a side. Particularly easy to handle grandchildren would be nice and eat greens alongside it too, but expectations were always low. It's not like they needed to stress too much about the health factor anyway, since chicken was already a great source of lean protein and potato dumplings were some of the healthiest things you could eat. And then, since these were a thing of what you would call the second half of the 1900s, it's important to mention that there was a general change in the American public. People were becoming more and more aware of the negative effects of typical American eating, as they kept noticing that it had a bit too much grease, saturated fat, and heavy portions to be serving to kids every day without consequences. Families began to emphasize home-cooked meals, steering away from the processed foods and focusing instead on simple, hearty dishes that aligned with a healthier lifestyle. This trend didn't continue to dominate the food landscape, given how popular fast food chains like McDonald's and Burger King are now. But back then, parents tried to teach kids the value of fresh, wholesome ingredients and balanced eating habits. This shift sparked a return to Grandma's kitchen, where meals were prepared with care, using real butter, fresh vegetables, and meats handpicked from the local butcher. That's why you have dishes like these: lovingly made casseroles, slow-roasted meats, and flavorful stews, which might not seem like something a kid would beg for initially, but end up becoming comfort foods they cherish once they give them a fair shot. Even desserts followed the same idea: homemade pies, bread puddings, and fruit cobblers made with ingredients straight from the pantry. Meals like this became a way to show love, with every dish carrying a story, a tradition, or a fond memory shared at the dinner table. Nothing like starting Thursday's breakfast off with some sweets. Any berry muffins were a very fun muffin to make because it was one of the few ways to get your grandkids to eat fruits without any kind of incessant complaining. As the name suggests, any kind of berry worked here, from cranberries to blueberries, strawberries, or blackberries. One of the most popular ones to use were raspberries because they could be frozen. But really, since it made use of so many different kinds of fruits, it meant that each season you would be enjoying an entirely different muffin. By now, you might have noticed this pattern in the meal plan so far. Take one day and pack it full of protein and heavy eating, then unwind the second day with some light food and sweets, then repeat. Grandmas also always used natural sweeteners like honey and sugar, and they typically used all-purpose flour. Another trend you might have picked up on, though we discussed this before too, is that this is another dish where you can pack a lot of different kinds of flavors. While obviously, when you're making a menu that caters to kids, you need to keep it varied because their attention spans get shorter every generation. What you also need is a dish that can work with different kinds of things they need to eat. A kid can't just eat blackberries. They need other kinds of fruit too. They can't eat just one kind of mushroom. They need to take it all in and get the most benefit from a balanced diet. Dishes like these let them sneak that into their system without any fuss, and that's probably why they kept them in rotation so often. Onion potato pancakes were a great follow-up lunch to the sweet treats you had in the morning, though you might be more used to having pancakes for breakfast. This particular one works slightly better as a lunch, though. Another name for these is latkes, and some people also call them hash browns, but they're different enough that I warrant them being their own thing. You take grated potatoes and onions that are mixed with thoroughly whisked eggs and flour, then you just leave them to fry until you get a crisp, tender pancake. It works amazingly well with applesauce and sour cream, which aren't sauces that kids would usually warm up to, but who better to work in everything you don't like and prove that it just needs to be made the right way? Yeah, a restaurant might be an experience, but Grandma's cooking is reliable. One of the best parts of these pancakes was that they used vegetable or canola oil, which gave them a uniquely crispy texture. Most of the time, you could even choose to serve these with sausages and bacon and customize them further with cheese or garlic. You could even bake them for a different texture, and they were really inexpensive, so it was easy to make these pancakes in batches. Now, dinner was an interesting affair on Thursday. Pasta and beans are something you definitely wouldn't think of a kid eating, nor would you ever imagine them ordering something called pasta fagioli al forno. The pasta used was also the type adults are mostly used to, stuff like ditalini and shells. As far as beans go, cannellini beans were mostly used because they were a flavor everyone recognized, and this dish still needed to test the waters a little. Even if Grandma was cooking it, not every kid was going to warm up to a plate so far out of left field, at least as far as their juvenile taste palates are considered. The tomato sauce helped, though, since it was a flavor profile they were already pretty much used to. Most pizzas used tomato sauce bases back then, too, even more so than now. The reason this worked best as a dinner is because it was a cozy, warm meal that restored your stamina and gave you an incredible night's rest. It was a dish you could make ahead of time and even freeze for later use, too. It had all kinds of beans and vegetables inside, as well as cheese, which helped kids warm up to it a lot, but the best part was that it was carbohydrate heavy. The beans had fiber, sure, but the carbohydrates gave you that much-needed jolt of energy to push through the final day of the week before hitting the hay for the weekend and completely unwinding. If it just had carbs, though, you'd probably be thinking they could do better. And you're right, they could, which is why they also made sure to include protein like sausage bits sometimes. Though the beans themselves were pretty good sources of protein, they often didn't have the same comforting feeling as chunks of sausage. Some other benefits they did offer, though, were a hefty supply of iron and potassium, which complemented the greens and their boatload of vitamin A and C. All in all, this is a pretty phenomenal dish to end a Thursday with, which is when you need energy the most. Now that the weekend is finally here, what better way to kick Friday off than with some pastry? Classic monkey bread is a pull-apart pastry that uses cinnamon, butter-coated dough, sugar, and a bundt pan to achieve a pretty unique sticky and sweet texture. It's a dish best served warm, and you can choose to put some additional things in it like pecans or drizzle icing on the top. Melted butter is usually used as a kind of glaze on top of the dough balls, and that gives the pastry itself a pretty familiar and sweet buttery aftertaste, which drives the kids crazy. Probably the best part about a breakfast like this is how much you can actually mess with it. While nobody encourages playing with your food, sometimes tossing the fork and knife out and just eating with your hands is a really fun and grounding experience. Also, when you have no responsibilities or obligations to meet after breakfast or tomorrow, you can take your time with this pull-apart dish and make as much of a scene as you'd like. The dough balls could also be prepared and left in an icebox or a refrigerator until you needed to bake them. And the cinnamon flavor meant that these became a quick and loyal comfort food. It was high in calories, especially if you had any kind of cream with it, but it was just the perfect way to start anyone's weekend. Turkey biscuit stew is a pretty fulfilling lunch, exactly the kind you'd want on a comforting day like Friday, too. You would take small turkey pieces alongside root vegetables like carrots, peas, potatoes, and beans, and mix them in a really thick gravy made from either stock or broth. What grandmas really knew was how to get the right textures into a dish, the ones that would drive the kids crazy at the dinner table. That's why they always used flour or cornstarch to additionally thicken the gravy before seasoning it. And the biscuits were either homemade or cooked using pre-made biscuit dough. All in all, it was a fantastic stew to open your weekend up with. It took a bit of getting used to for some kids to adjust to the flavor because a turkey biscuit stew has a lot going on for it, and it may be overwhelming to some kids, but it didn't take long for them to stop sleeping on this dish. You might be asking, why make a stew on Friday of all days, though? And it's because not only is it a pretty family-friendly lunch, it also works great as leftovers. If you have any leftover turkey from the holidays or want a stew that can last 2 days, then this is a great protein-filled dish to make. Kids back then were definitely more athletic than they are today, so they needed a good amount of protein and fiber to keep their muscles repaired and energized. Something warm and cozy stews like this were great at providing. Fridays seemed to be for baked goods, as sausage manicotti is another baked pasta dish, which might confuse you initially because what kind of kid was asking for traditional Italian baked pastas for Friday night dinner? Most settled for meatloafs and thought God had personally blessed the earth if they could get Pizza Hut out of their parents. If they spent a weekend over with their grandparents, though, they would sometimes get a whiff of them cooking up some sausage manicotti. Now, I know what you're thinking. This sounds like a train wreck waiting to happen. Obviously, you might be thinking about some pretty complex flavors, but it really is just pasta tubes that are stuffed with sausage and cheese covered in marinara and baked. That's actually a lot more kid-friendly than you or I probably gave it credit for as far as initial impressions are considered. Kids are already big suckers for anything cheese-related, especially if good quality cheese like ricotta is used. Italian sausages are one of the best ones you can buy, and pasta tubes are suspiciously close to wraps and other stuffed food in terms of texture and sensations. All in all, it's not really that out of pocket for a kid to eat. You gotta trust the vision. Home chefs, especially grandmas, always tend to know what they're doing when deciding the meal plan for the day. Okay, since it's officially Saturday, do we choose to go out on a high note for the week with some explosive dishes or a light breakfast to ease into the weekend? The answer is in the middle ground, because eggs in a hole is a simple enough breakfast that you could call it light, but flavorful enough that it would definitely feel like you're eating a proper meal with a lot of effort put into it. The design of this dish also enticed kids too, because the slice of bread had a hole cut in the middle, and the bread would be lightly fried in butter too. The egg, and especially its yolk, would be fried and placed into the hole in the bread, and you could choose to leave the egg yolk runny or cooked depending on how the kids preferred it. Interactive little dishes like this one really get the kids jumping for joy at the table, especially if it can be topped with things like bacon as well. It was easy and really quick, and you could make it with different kinds of bread and top it with new meats to get a better and more varied flavor each Saturday. Pretty convenient and creative as far as breakfasts go, right? Nothing like staying true to one's chicken roots for a Saturday lunch. Chicken Amandine is a dish that you would really hear about if you grew up in French neighborhoods or ever had any French relatives and friends, because Amandines were some of the most traditional weekend lunches you could get in those places. It involved these chicken breasts, which were pretty generously sized, definitely enough for a kid or two, and they had to be cooked and topped with these toasted almonds. That's where they get the name from, but there are other stars to this show. The buttery sauce that has lemon zest and juice is to die for, and the chicken can be done in two ways depending on your preferences. You can either pan fry it or bake it, whatever the family likes. You usually serve chicken Amandine with rice or vegetables, but some people would even make it into a sandwich to get more of a comforting feel out of it, since rice-based dishes weren't every kid's cup of tea. It was healthy. It didn't bloat you up. It had little calories compared to other dishes, and there was a lot of good stuff going into this health-wise, which made it one of the ideal choices of the late 90s as far as weekend lunches go. See, grandmas knew that the trick to a good weekend is to eat light and refreshing, so your body is ready for Monday. So far, we've had a pretty big lack of seafood, haven't we? Let's fix that with an iconic seafood dinner that grandmas loved making. Shrimp Putanesca is a bit of a mouthful to pronounce, but leave that to the chefs. This dish is a spicy, savory seafood-based one that uses shrimp instead of pasta, like the actual dish it is based off of, pasta alla Putanesca, and it is also lighter on the spices than the original recipe. What it really tries to focus on is the anchovies, olives, and capers, which create the perfect backdrop for the shrimp to shine. Green olives give it a briny flavor that's further accentuated by the capers, with the tomatoes and anchovies working together to create a sauce that brings the best out of the fresh shrimp. It would usually be peeled and deveined because it was the meat base of the dish, so it needed to be as easy to eat as possible. Still, no matter how much Grandma would tweak the family cookbook and add things to this dish that made it more and more kid-friendly, it kind of struggled to find an audience with them. It's just not something kids would be too fond of. But given how many cookbooks actually mention this dish, I think it's safe to say it's a bit more popular than I might have been led to believe. The best part of the dish was that it was really easy to prepare, so you always had a great source of seafood easily available if you were deciding to make this dish. It's definitely up there with Mediterranean-style cuisine, but kids that have already acquired a palate for seafood will definitely be able to appreciate this. Sundays were perhaps our grandmother's favorite days because it was the one day all family members were together. Sunday means you always go hard and spare no expense on the food, because it's the day families get together and order out or go out on the town for a proper meal. If you decided to stay in and get cooking instead, then a Sunday breakfast that will not ever fail you is fully loaded homemade bagels. What does it mean to be a fully loaded bagel? My friend, I'm glad you asked. It refers to bagels that have been first topped with all kinds of seeds and spices. They're sometimes known as everything bagels. The name suits them too because they really do have every kind of seed, like sesame seeds, poppy seeds, and in some communities, even benny seeds from Africa. They're always topped with amazing spreads like cream cheese, butter, and all kinds of meaty toppings too. You can have smoked salmon or capers or sausages, bacon strips, and turkey. It's literally whatever you fancy. I mean, it is Sunday after all. Instead of all-purpose flour, people would use up high-gluten flour for this, which gave the bagels a really chewy texture. But the yeast helped them have a very light and airy feel when you did get to eating. While it was definitely time-consuming to make this, it was also an incredible amount of fun. That fits Sunday, doesn't it? After all you have is time, and all you want to do is have fun with it. You didn't honestly think we could have a list called A Full Week of Grandma's Favorite Meals and not mention meatloaf, did you? Whether we're talking the start of the 1900s with the 1910s or the Great Depression and its effect throughout the 20s and 30s, or even fast forward to the explosive culture-defining decade of the 70s, meatloafs are timeless in every sense of the word. It was one of those meals that really upheld family values because it was in ads, it was in cookbooks, it was in TV shows back in the day like the Donna Reed Show. It really was that meal that gave off strong images of a traditional, humble lifestyle with a loving wife and kids to come home to. Plus, it stuck with the times too. When TV culture rolled around, Swanson and other brands started using pre-made meatloafs that you could heat quickly, so that darling wife could take it easy on Sunday for once. It became tied to Sunday meals in general, dinners, lunches, and sometimes even breakfast, because some families like to do a Saturday and Sunday meatloaf night. Either way, there were few meatloafs that rivaled what your grandma could make, and that's because they had been refining the recipes since the early days of the 20th century, so they saw many loaves come and go, many takes and ideas flourish and tank, and they learned it from it all. Bet you're glad they maintained those cookbooks now, aren't you? We're going to end the list with an iconic dinner of holiday crown pork roast, which wasn't only perfect for Sunday dinners, but was also perfect for every holiday season dinner-related crisis you could have. Pork loin ribs with a crown made of stuffing that had breadcrumbs, apples, onions, celery, nuts, and more. The reason they call it a crown pork roast is because the ribs are arranged in this wonderful circular shape, which gives it the impression of a full-on crown. They're then tied together and roasted, and it makes an incredibly effective eye catcher if you're ever serving it up at a party. Basically, if you want to be the center of the room and the topic of everyone's gossip, put in the effort and bring one of these in. I promise no kid or adult will forget you. I mean, if somebody's grandma actually did make this for Sunday dinner at their age, then nobody in the neighborhood ever forgot about them. I put the neighbors in there too because unless your family averaged the numbers of a small tribe, there would usually be leftovers for the neighbors too. This dish probably has every theme we've covered so far on the list. It works great with kids. It works even better with adults. It's got an insane amount of variety because you can use different blends of seasonings and spices, and the stuffing is really friendly to customization. You can make your own unique stuffing and try it out. That's what a lot of people did, and so each home got its own identity for their unique takes on holiday crown pork roasts. It's such a beloved holiday tradition that it's literally there in the name after all. Moving on, let's talk about Grandma's shoe fly pie. Rings a bell? This Pennsylvania Dutch classic was a true taste of Americana. Grandma's shoe fly pie was a staple at family picnics back in the day. It was a pie that was both comforting and unique, with a flavor profile that was hard to forget. The secret to a great shoe fly pie was the molasses filling. It was a rich, sticky mixture of molasses, brown sugar, and spices. Shoe fly pie made a lot of buzz in the 19th century, with its name supposedly coming from the need to shoo away flies from the sweet molasses filling. Grandma's version of this pie was the highlight of the dinner table during the holidays and was often served with a cup of coffee. The best part? While this pie might sound intimidating, it was actually quite easy to make. The filling comes together in minutes, and the crumb topping is a breeze. Take it as a sign to whip this up and take it to your next potluck. Everyone's going to thank you. Now let's put up some Christmas lights because next on the list we have a holiday classic. Gingerbread cookies. These have been a holiday tradition in the United States for as long as one can remember, but did you know they date back to ancient Greece and Egypt, where ginger was used in various forms? These became popular in Europe when gingerbread houses became a tradition. And well, the rest is history. Decorating these cookies is still a tradition in many households in America, with grandmas bringing their own unique and special techniques for making icing and adding candy. Remember Gingy from Shrek, the spunky gingerbread man who stole the show with his quick wit and bravery? He was created after Grandma's delicious baked treats. When you think of timeless grandma recipes, old-fashioned apple pie is the first thing that comes to mind. Grandma's apple pie was the stuff of legends. with apples sourced from the local orchard and a recipe that's been passed down through generations. This sweet treat dates back to the early settlers in America, who brought with them the tradition of pie making. Grandma's version was often made with a lattice crust and seasoned with cinnamon and nutmeg, making it a comforting treat during the fall and holiday seasons. The secret to a great apple pie is the perfect blend of sweet and tart apples. Granny Smith apples are a popular choice for their tartness, but you can use your favorite variety. The spices, such as cinnamon and nutmeg, add depth of flavor. Now, most of us just go through the McDonald's drive-thru when we're craving apple pie, but let's be honest, the Mickey D's pie has gotten nothing on what sweet old Grandma used to make in the kitchen. Remember those refrigerator cookies where Gram had to chill the dough for hours before baking up a delicious batch just for us? Well, these Icebox cookies were a great make-ahead treat. Grandma could prepare the dough days in advance, store it in the refrigerator or freezer, and then slice and bake fresh cookies whenever she needed them. This made them perfect for when she had unexpected guests over. The name Icebox Cookies comes from the practice of chilling the dough in the refrigerator before baking. This step helped the cookies maintain their shape and made them easier to slice from a log of dough, which gave them their classic round or oval shape. The best thing about these cookies was how versatile they were. The recipe could be customized however you like. Some grandmas had a go-to recipe that included various add-ins like chocolate chips, nuts, dried fruit, or different flavored doughs, such as lemon, cinnamon, or even nutty variations. Things like bœuf bourguignon, otherwise known as a beef brisket, aren't any different. You get a traditional beef chuck that gets slow-cooked in red wine, beef broth, onions, and herbs, and you wait until the meat is so soft you barely even need teeth to pull it apart. This dish was one of the highlights of French cooking, which was normally associated with luxury dining but got modified for the everyday home, and I gotta say, I'm so glad somebody came along and did that modifying. I wouldn't know how to act without my weekly fix of beef briskets, especially with how well they make mushrooms stand out. A dish that works well with mushrooms is one you have to hold close to your heart, always. Nothing says an everyday meal like some soup, and nothing helps something survive being an everyday meal like having some ham in it. Next on our list is Grandma McAndrews's Irish soda bread. Hear me out, this bread didn't actually have any soda pop. Yeah, steer clear of Coca-Cola and Dr. Pepper's. The only soda you need here is baking soda. Made with just a few ingredients, flour, baking soda, buttermilk, and a touch of salt, it's a bread that's as straightforward as it is delicious. Irish soda bread has its origins in Ireland, where baking soda was used as a leavening agent instead of yeast. Grandma McAndrew's version was known for its slightly tangy flavor and crusty exterior, making it perfect for sopping up stews or enjoying with a pat of butter. This one looks just as good as it tastes. The classic cross on top of Irish soda bread symbolizes the Christian cross. It's a beautiful tradition that adds a touch of history to this delicious bread. Plus, Irish soda bread is incredibly versatile. Beyond the classic loaf, you can shape it into scones, muffins, or even pancakes. Speaking of holiday staples, the Spritz cookie was another favorite during the Noel days. So, Spritz cookies have Scandinavian roots, particularly in Sweden and Germany. The name Spritz comes from the German word spritzen, which means to squirt or to spray, referring to how the dough is pressed out of the cookie press. These were known for their distinctive shapes, which came from using a cookie press. Here's the fun part. These cookie presses weren't just ordinary cookie cutters. They were passed down from generation to generation and held special memories. I'm sure your grandma has a treasured box just waiting to be handed down to you if you let her know how much you miss these sweet treats. These biscuits were a little heavy on the pockets back in the day, because of how much butter went into the dough, and it was typically flavored with vanilla or almond extract. So you know how America and pulled pork go together like jam on toast, right? After all, it's something you can feed a whole crowd and have them feeling full and satisfied. It's a showstopper, but you can make a lot of easy things with it. Most dishes you can make and serve will have people asking you what your recipe is, but that's just how easy pulled pork is to work with. So when I say this next sentence, hear it with an open mind. How do you feel about cherry cola pulled pork? Yeah, slow-cooked, barbecue-y, savory pulled pork left to simmer in a pool of cherry cola, barbecue sauce, and other seasonings. The first time I heard of this dish, I struggled just to imagine all of those flavors in one bite. Like, barbecue sauce is a dip, pulled pork is a main dish, and cherry cola is a drink. You're used to having all that separately, right? Despite that, since it was all made from things that were so readily available in most homes, and since it was right up the alley of home chefs in their slow cooking era, it took off in a major way. Especially in the South, where everything involved in this dish is something people were already having on a daily basis. So, Linder cookies were another jam-filled classic, but these ones originated in Austria. Linder cookies were named after the city of Linz in Austria. They were a smaller cookie version of the Linder torte, which was one of the oldest known cakes in the world, dating back to at least the 1600s. I mean, who doesn't love an easy-to-grab, bite-sized version of their favorite cake? The dough for Linder cookies traditionally included ground nuts, usually almonds or hazelnuts, which gave the cookies their distinctive nutty flavor. Linder cookies were famous for their window design. The top cookie had a small shape cut out, usually a heart, star, or circle, which allowed the colorful jam to peek through. This not only made these biscuits the most visually appealing dessert on the table, but also gave us a chance to see the sweet filling inside. Yeah, some of us out here aren't big fans of surprises. Making Linder cookies was a labor-intensive process, but Grandma always loved spending hours in the kitchen as long as it made us happy and filled our tummies. If old-fashioned apple pie had one competitor back in the day, it was definitely Great-Grandma's peach cobbler. This classic dessert featured a sweet, juicy peach filling topped with a buttery, biscuit-like crust. Peach cobbler has its roots in the American South, where fresh peaches are abundant during the summer months. Great-Grandma's recipe was cherished for its perfect balance of sweet and tart flavors, with the cobbler topping baked to a golden brown perfection. Served warm with a scoop of vanilla ice cream, it was the ultimate comfort food. It was also an item you'd see everywhere in bakeries. Well, not anymore though, because it has fallen out of favor and replaced with more sophisticated desserts like peach crumble. Nothing tastes like Grandma's cooking though, not even the crumble cookies. Let's face it, Snickerdoodle cookies were always the first to disappear from Grandma's cookie jar. It was hard to keep your hands to yourself when these cinnamon-flavored treats were calling out your name from the kitchen counter. Ever wonder what gives Snickerdoodles their unique texture? Well, the cinnamon wasn't just used for flavor. Paired with the cream of tartar as a leavening agent, it makes the cookie stand out from the rest. These delicious treats were always the star of the dessert table during the holidays, and Grandma's secret trick to making them extra soft was chilling the dough before baking. These cookies became the talk of the town in the early 21st century, and even Monica from Friends couldn't help but rave about them. Remember Season 1, Episode 8? If not, it's time to binge and jog up your memory. All right, let's switch gears from sweet to savory. So this next dish might not be as complex as a Hubbard squash pie, but don't let that fool you. Grandma Maggio's spaghetti sauce is a timeless classic. Let's be honest, spaghetti is pretty much the national food of America. It's the answer to all our prayers when we can't decide what to eat after a busy day. Granny knew what she was doing when she whipped up this spaghetti sauce. This rich, savory sauce was the star of many family dinners, simmered for hours to develop deep, complex flavors. Made with ripe tomatoes, garlic, and a blend of herbs, it was a sauce that brought people together around the table, and still does in many parts of the country. The recipe for this sauce likely comes from Italian-American traditions, where family recipes were passed down through generations. Now I know store-bought sauces have taken over our pastas, but there's nothing quite like homemade goodness. This one remains a classic for those who remember the labor of love that went into making it. Here's Sweden's version of the classic grandma cookie. Thumbprint cookies, or hallongrata, were jam-filled cookies that were all the rage in Scandinavian countries. The name hallongrata translated to raspberry cave, which was a nod to the jam-filled center. So the standout trait of these cookies was the indent made using thumbs for the jam filling. This is where it got its name, Thumbprint cookies. The indent was made by pressing a thumb or spoon into the dough before baking, and the little touch added a personal element to each cookie. These cookies were a hit amongst kids, not just because of their taste, but because of how fun it was to make them. It didn't feel like a chore at all and was more like a family activity. Oh, and if you ever found yourself wondering what gave these cookies their iconic golden finish, Grandma might have brushed the dough with an egg wash before baking. Speaking of strange cookies, who says cookies have to be sweet? Great-grandma's sour cream drop cookies were a delightful surprise. Now, I know sour cream is the last ingredient that comes to mind when you think of cookies, but this unusual addition made our childhoods 1,000 times more delicious. These cookies were a blend of soft and tangy thanks to the addition of sour cream. Sour cream was a popular ingredient in baking during the early 20th century, adding moisture and a slight tang to cookies and cakes. These must be one of the simplest forms of cookies. As all baking books will tell you, they are also known as drop cookies. They are so called as the cookie dough is so soft that it drops off the spoon and onto the baking sheet. This cookie was often enjoyed with powdered sugar or a glaze to trick kids into thinking they were in for something sweet. These sour cream cookies prove that sometimes the most surprising flavors can be found in the most unexpected places. If you had Scottish grandparents, there's a huge chance you grew up eating shortbread cookies. These originated in Scotland and date back to as far as the 12th century. Originally, they were a luxury treat reserved for special occasions like Christmas, weddings, and Hawk Minone, the Scottish New Year. But Grandma's simplified version of the recipe found its way to many homes around the world, and it quickly became a special holiday favorite. So this cookie is made with just 3 basic ingredients: butter, sugar, and flour. The term shortbread comes from the word short, which refers to the high-fat content in the dough. This meant they weren't really the healthiest choice of dessert out there, but it was okay to cheat a little when it came to shortbread cookies on the kitchen counter. These biscuits were often cut into classic shapes like rounds, fingers, or wedges, known as petticoat tails in Scotland. So Grandma's cookbook didn't only come in handy to satisfy the sweet tooth, her casseroles were to die for too, and the ground beef casserole was comfort food at its finest. Remember when this baked goodness was the ultimate weeknight meal? It combined ground beef with vegetables topped with a crispy layer of cheese or breadcrumbs, and if you begged enough, Granny used to go light with the carrots. This casserole was a go-to for busy weeknights and family gatherings alike. The origins of this dish can be traced back to the 1950s, when casseroles became a popular way to feed a crowd on a budget. Grandma's version was particularly beloved for its rich flavor and the way it brought the whole family together around the dinner table. Sadly, it's fallen out of favor, but it's never too late to give Grandma a call and ask her to share that secret recipe. Osobo is something that's known for smoothness. The way the meat falls off of the bone, the saltiness of the gremolata, the freshness of that first bite, which is an experience that you have to savor all on its own. If you're like one of those people who loves to try out your local Italian-American cuisine, you'd be doing yourself one hell of an injustice by not ever trying this. The way this dish got popular was because while the dish was originally made only with veal, by the time it hit American soil, it was using substitutes like beef or pork shanks. This made the dish accessible for your everyday Joe who can't afford to spend a lot on vegetables because, bills. Plus, if you add some gremolata, which is a mix of lemon zest, garlic, and parsley, to the dish, then you get a pretty balanced set of flavors that bounce off of each other. This is one of the finest parts of Italian-American cuisine, and it got popular for being a wonderful family meal that can keep everyone content and full. Enough with the butter cookies. Let's switch gears to some chocolatey goodness for this next one. Remember the classic chocolate crinkle cookie, anyone? It's hard not to love a dessert when it comes with a rich chocolate flavor. These cookies got their crinkle effect by rolling the dough in powdered sugar before baking. As the cookies spread and rise in the oven, the powdered sugar cracks and creates the classic crinkle effect. So chocolate crinkle cookies gained popularity in the United States in the 1960s when cacao powder became readily available at grocery stores. No holiday cookie tray is complete without this one. And it's so good that even renowned pastry chef and TV personality Duff Goldman can't stop raving about it. If you're craving a good chocolate treat, it's time to whip these bad boys up. That was the thought process between the ham hock minestrone, which got so much goodwill with the people because it was one versatile soup. After the recession and the post-war period, there was this nationwide love for food that was practical and could work in many different ways. The population was too accustomed to rationing and making the best use out of everything, so even when times relaxed and the dust settled, with all this new developing technology like crockpots, people still couldn't get out of the habit. That's why things like this work so well. They take a simple format, even simpler ingredients, but give you a full team of flavors that you can write home about. This soup uses ham hock simmered with vegetables and beans. Then you can add pasta or rice, whichever you'd like more. Though traditionally most recipes call for the pasta instead. If something's going to be smoky flavor-wise, you just know it's going to do well in the South, and that's where this soup was made the most. The way you know most of these recipes have been forgotten is because you just don't hear dishes like that anymore. Not in the middle of this pita wrap or burrito bowl world. So this next one was my personal favorite growing up. I'm talking about Granny's Spice Cookies. These cookies were a favorite during the holiday season, featuring a blend of warm spices like cinnamon, nutmeg, and cloves. They were known for their aromatic scent and rich, spicy flavor. Pairing them with a warm cup of hot chocolate or chai tea was like adding the cherry on top. Spice cookies have a long history, dating back to medieval Europe where spices were used to enhance baked goods. Now, you don't really see them at bakeries or stores anymore, but baking spice cookies is the perfect Friday night activity if you decide to stay in. Like Cobbler? Then you need to hear about the wonderful blueberry ones everyone used to make in their crockpots. It isn't really a secret that Cobbler is an everyday dessert in most American households, and it's been that way for longer than either you or I have been around. It'll stay that way after everyone we know is gone too. Some things are just generational like that. Blueberry cobbler used to be made in crockpots back then to really let it absorb the flavor. And since you could just leave the dessert to bask in the flavors on its own, people started making it so much more. After crockpots went mainstream and most households had one, sales for lots of berries and fruits went up because of how easy it became to make desserts surrounding them. Blueberries definitely weren't an exception, and the best part was that you could make this at any time of the year, and it would still work. Like, you know how some people don't like having hot chocolate outside of winter? You'd never get any concerns like that with a blueberry cobbler. There was always someone ready to eat a whole plate. If we take a small intermission from the dessert side of things and step on over to some hearty, comforting, and homely soups, we'll find a golden recipe lost among the cookbooks of the 20th century that don't get to see the light of day anymore. Before theater popcorn became a favorite, Grandma's caramel popcorn balls were all we had. And the best part? They didn't cost a fortune. These sweet, sticky treats were a favorite for movie nights and holiday parties. Made with freshly popped popcorn coated in a rich caramel sauce, they were as fun to make as they were to eat. Caramel popcorn balls became popular in the mid-20th century as a playful snack. Of course, grandmas take things to new heights, so her version was shaped into balls and sometimes rolled in additional toppings like nuts or sprinkles. These treats were a hit with kids and adults alike. While they might not be as common today, they still bring a smile to anyone who remembers the fun of making and enjoying them. Do you know what something peanut butter lovers love more than a classic peanut butter cookie? Peanut butter blossoms, of course. So what made them better? Well, it was definitely the signature Hershey's Kiss topping. This classic combination of peanut butter cookie and milk chocolate kiss made this cookie a fan favorite. The recipe for peanut butter blossoms is thought to have been created in the 1950s by a Hershey's employee to promote Hershey's Kisses and encourage people to incorporate milk chocolate in their desserts. In 1999, peanut butter blossoms were named the National Favorite Cookie by the American Cookie Association, which solidified its status as the classic American dessert. Peanut butter blossoms were famous throughout the year. From being a staple at holidays due to the Hershey's Kiss on top resembling a Christmas ornament to a hit at bake sales because of their appealing looks, peanut butter blossoms never disappoint. For example, Just take this dish, sticky citrus chicken. Ever heard of something like that? I bet you haven't. Isn't it interesting to think about how just a few decades ago dishes like these were so common? This dish was a modernized take on glazed chicken, which I'm sure you know of. It just wanted to add a citrusy and tangy element to it instead, and that happened because of the mix of honey and soy sauce and citrus fruits, which made the glaze really memorable. Most glazes were either sweet or really smoky, so there wasn't much to go on for fans of the middle, the tangy, and the zesty. This dish was something that filled that void in so many people, because it was a great way to do something new with the same drumsticks and thighs you've always been used to. The best part of it was that you could get a different sauce depending on the fruit you used. Sometimes you could use oranges, but you'd get a different taste altogether if you used lime instead. That's why kids in particular loved this dish, because you could spin it so many different ways and still get an addictive result that works nutritionally too. So, Grandma's molasses cookies might have not been everyone's cup of tea, but for those who loved them, they're a nostalgic treat missed dearly. Molasses cookies are older than most of the cookies in your cookie jar. They have their origins in colonial America, where molasses was a common sweetener due to its affordability compared to sugar. Early settlers used molasses to make cookies, cakes, and bread, creating recipes passed down to generations. Graham decided to take things up a notch and often spiced these cookies with a mix of ginger, cinnamon, and cloves. There were typically two types of molasses cookies back in the day: soft or crisp. Depending on how long they were baked, some grandmas preferred them soft and chewy, while others let them bake longer to become crispy and crunchy. Which ones did you prefer? Now let's talk about Meemaw's milk pudding. This comforting dessert was a staple in many southern kitchens and offered a sweet finish to any meal. Made with just a few simple ingredients, milk, sugar, and a touch of vanilla, it's a classic example of how simple can be absolutely delicious. Milk pudding dates back to early American cuisine, where it was often enjoyed as a treat or a way to use up surplus milk. Grandmas decided to take it up a notch with a sprinkle of nutmeg or a dollop of whipped cream. Here's something you probably didn't know about this delicacy. Meemaw's milk pudding is a simpler, old-fashioned version of what we now know as rice pudding. Rice pudding is the fancier version. So if you ever crave something simple and good, milk pudding is where it's at. Pea and ham soup got its name because of how affordable it was. This is probably the cheapest thing on the list to make. Actually, it literally costs just a few cents. All you needed was ham and peas. You'd simmer them in the crock pot with diced ham and some vegetables like potatoes and celery, then slow cook it until the soup got thickened. You'd get this incredibly creamy, lovely soup that was just perfect for winter nights or after a long, exhausting weekend. Maybe you want to ease up on your stomach and eat something healthy for a change, but you still want some familiar flavors to keep you company. A soup like this would be right up your alley. It costs nothing, feels better than most things, and you can make it anytime. You could probably even take a nap and wake up to the scent of the soup slowly cooking, becoming the final product. Now let's go back to the roots with this next one. Grandma's sweet Hubbard squash custard pie was a unique twist on traditional pumpkin pie, featuring the sweet and nutty flavor of Hubbard squash instead. Whether inspired by a traditional farm recipe or a hearty harvest meal, this pie began as a humble yet beloved dish in early American kitchens. It combined the rich, nutty flavor of Hubbard squash with the creamy sweetness of custard, creating a tradition that warmed family tables for generations. It was a favorite during the fall season. Hubbard squash was a popular ingredient in many home kitchens due to its versatility and natural sweetness. Grandma's pie was a seasonal treat, often served during holiday dinners and special occasions. Grandmothers were truly ahead of their time with this one. Beef Ren Dong was a highlight of New York dining. You could go to any neighborhood in Queens that was known for its beef and they would have Ren Dong available, but it wasn't just New York. It was San Francisco and Los Angeles too, and in the former there was the Tenderloin district where meat-based dishes reigned supreme. The 1970s were the peak of beef Ren Dong, and that's because it was around then that it got easy enough to make at home. People could enjoy it without going to a restaurant, thanks to slow cookers. Beef briskets were used to make Ren Dong, But the magic was actually in this spice paste, which consisted of lemongrass, ginger, garlic, chilies, and turmeric. It sounds like a lot, but it's the genuine article, and it's bound to knock you out of the park no matter what dish you apply it to. Ren Dong is full of warm flavors, and it's as savory gets, plus the caramelized coating on the beef is really the cherry on top. It's usually served with rice, so if you ever feel like eating something out of an 80s animation, you can make some rendang. It comes closer than enough. One thing that we all loved about Grandma's special cookies was how light they were on the stomach. Butter cookies are a great example. These were made with just a few simple ingredients: flour, sugar, butter, and sometimes a touch of vanilla or almond extract. But despite their simplicity, butter cookies were a timeless classic in Grandma's cookie jar. These biscuits are often associated with Denmark, where they are known as småkager. I'm sure you know Danish butter cookies are famous worldwide. Remember the iconic blue tins filled with butter cookies? I think our first real heartbreak was opening that tin, expecting sweet treats, only to find Mom's sewing supplies instead. Let me know in the comments if I got you there. These cookies have a very long shelf life because of their low moisture content, which makes them perfect gifts during the holidays. Of course, we can't have a conversation about Graham's iconic cookies without bringing up sugar cookies. Now, these biscuits really shaped all our childhoods, didn't they? I mean, they were the life of every party. Not only were they finger-licking delicious, but these were easy to whip up and could be customized according to any occasion. These baked treats have been around for centuries. They originated in the 1700s in Pennsylvania and started out as easy-to-bake treats with ingredients easily found in the pantry such as butter, sugar, eggs, and flour. Over the years, they've taken many colors and shapes and have even become a staple during the holiday season, especially Christmas. Don't forget to leave a few out for Santa. You never know, you might just end up with a few extra presents. Last, but certainly not least, let's talk about old-fashioned peanut brittle. The recipe is a simple yet delicious example of old-fashioned candy making, requiring precision and patience that only grandmothers have. This crunchy, sweet treat was a holiday favorite, made by boiling sugar and corn syrup until it reached the perfect crack stage, then mixing in roasted peanuts. Yeah, I'll leave that to Granny. Grandma's peanut brittle was particularly loved for its crisp, brittle texture and the generous amount of peanuts that added a satisfying crunch. It's a classic candy that's still enjoyed today, but Grandma's version remains a cherished memory for many who remember the joy of homemade treats. Okay, this one is like a warm hug from the past. Remember Grandma's classic meatloaf? This savory dish was a family dinner favorite, known for its comforting flavors and satisfying texture. Meatloaf has been a staple of American cuisine since the early 20th century, offering a budget-friendly way to feed a family. Grandma's recipe was particularly loved for its moist interior and flavorful crust, often served with mashed potatoes and vegetables. It started out as a way to use up leftover meat scraps, but became a cultural icon of comfort food. If your Sunday fell on a Thanksgiving or a Christmas, you just knew you were going to be eating very, very good. Man, making this video made me miss my grandmother's home. Like and subscribe if you feel the same way about home-cooked food.